Hi, everybody. Welcome to the greenhouse. I'm Sarah brazenly here to dig into some stuff with you because we've been taking it a little light lately, right? Going for some low-hanging fruit, if you will. Tonight, we're going to be digging a little deeper, climbing a little higher, whatever. However you want to look at it. It's a little more in-depth, a little more complicated, but I think it's going to be worth it because I keep hearing the same thing where people are throwing around words without knowing what they mean. And wow, boy, did I find a really great example of that here. Let's meet tonight's contestant, shall we? But first, obligatory plug, please like this video if you enjoy this kind of content and subscribe to the channel to let the algorithm know that for sure. Thank you so much. Tonight's special guest is a fellow who calls himself Short Fat Otaku. Couldn't have said it better, I guess. And he is doing this fun thing where he presents himself as a rational outsider while actually arguing conservative ideas. So a familiar flavor, really, but sort of a newfangled take on it.
Purity spiral comes for everybody, but let's ask the question, why? Recently, ContraPoints got fucking destroyed online over a tweet. Yet again, this time the tweet was, Gen Z queer people are hard to figure out. They're like, I'm an asexual slut who loves sex. You don't have to be trans to be trans. Casual reminder that heterosexuality doesn't make your gayness any less valid. If you read this tweet carefully, you'll notice that ContraPoints doesn't even say that you can't be any of these contradictory things.
No, but there's definitely sort of an implied disdain there, I would think. I would argue, right? It's a joke. It's, kind of making fun of them. It is. And I'm really not sure that he understands that.
She only says that she doesn't understand how it works. And that is apparently enough to be considered doing right-wing talking points by people more left than her, who are smelling the blood in the water. She responded with a 5-page manifesto explaining her larger point. And
wow.
Despite the mucho texto, I did read it.
I did not. But not only can these people not take a joke, I'm not sure they can identify them when they see them.
She really sounds like she's holding back a bit of hate for her own audience here. This ain't the first time it's happened to her, too. And
well, maybe that's why. Maybe ContraPoints is frustrated because the goalposts keep moving. And if there's anyone who's gone out of their way to try and meet these standards, it is they.
One of those other events led to her making an hour and 40-minute video about getting cancelled back in January 2020. Same thing with Lindsay Ellis. She's had to do multiple videos about all the shit her audience has come at her with before.
I hadn't seen this.
To say that the left cannot name the problem that plagues it, because doing so
kind of spooky
gives the right power.
A friend of mine named it the Beast, the name for this fear that we all live under but don't acknowledge. And over the last few years, I have had so many of my colleagues, all of them women, people of color, trans people, queer people, or some combination of the above, voice to me the constant anxiety that they live with about maybe saying something wrong that will get them on the bad side of their own communities. Every thought is a hostage situation.
Gosh.
Is this the tweet that's going to sink me? So
that sounds terrifying, right? Sounds familiar though, doesn't it? It's almost like cancel culture exists.
Lindsay Ellis is stuck denying that the problem exists, even as it ravages her, while being genuinely fearful of her own audience, because she doesn't want to give an inch to her political opponents. This has happened
really?
To
Is that why?
Times. His
I feel like that's not why.
Over the kink at Pride discourse. Because
it's happened to Vosh. Poor Vosh. Oh.
His audience turned on him over a relatively innocuous take on mindfulness because it sounded too bootstrappy for them. And asking anybody to take any sort of responsibility for their actions rather than blame material conditions or historic oppression or whatever the fuck is apparently anti-socialist.
Yeah, I don't know that material conditions are really the thing that a lot of people are blaming. It seems like it's, their own discomfort. Like, discomfort is oppression. I don't know. They kind of just throw these words around again. And I apologize in advance because we are going to have just a little vocabulary lesson here in a minute because this guy just makes it necessary.
Not bootlicking discipline. Not suck it up and don't complain about the problems in life discipline. But the ability to take stock of what's in front of you and to steel yourself and to do it. I have described what I mean by discipline. There are people in chat who are willfully misinterpreting me because they are angry. You people can shut the fuck up or you can get banned.
See, I guess that's what I'm saying is, are they willfully misinterpreting him? Or do these people genuinely not understand any kind of subtext? I really don't even know anymore. Okay, because this short fat otaku guy, just at the beginning of his own video, seemed to miss the subtext of what ContraPoint said. But here he has, a video of Vosh complaining about the same thing. So, yeah, I'm not even really sure what's going on with these people right now.
Okay? Because I'm getting really tired of your contrarians.
And fuck, I don't even want to go over how often it's happened to She One Head due to her 2014 era association with Sargon and Isaac's extended friend group.
Oh my goodness, so many cameos in this video.
And through examining these creators, by noticing the it's never good enough tendency among their audiences, we might be able to actually answer that question. Why does the purity spiral eventually come for everybody?
That is a good question, right? That sounds fairly reasonable. And I want to say, before we get too far into it, that I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of what this guy says. He just says it really badly and demonstrates several fundamental misunderstandings, but just stuff, just ignorance, points of ignorance. Like, look up some fucking words, dude. Ooh, now we're getting into it. I remember this article.
And 4, here's the Karlin Borisenko story. How knitters got knotted in a purity spiral. A process of moral outbidding is corroding small communities from within. It's easy to see what's happening on the surface. People are traveling down the purity spiral, demanding others be more ideologically in line with them, ostracizing them when they're not, and breaking friendships, destroying communities, and closing off opportunities.
In knitting circles.
Let's look at what's going on a bit more in depth. The first example is obvious. Progressives want free talk.
We're not going to go through all of his examples because his misunderstandings are redundant. All right, let's hear his summary of the knitting circle problem.
This is just an example of that one rule. Any institution not explicitly anti-left will slowly become left over time, which I personally view as a reflection of the inherently subversive nature of leftist politics.
Okay, that's 2 big chunks right on top of one another, and he does this the whole way through. He is one of those people, a lot of people do this, where they just kind of throw ideas at you, boom, 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 stacked on top of one another, in quick succession before you really even have a chance to process what they're saying. So, if you're not thinking critically, you can very easily just kind of end up sitting there going, okay, all right, sure, maybe, okay, you just get dragged along. Cute, right? But so let's take that back just a little bit.
Of that one rule, any institution not explicitly anti-left will slowly become left over time.
I had heard this before, but I had to look it up. It's very interesting. I have it on my phone. Hang on, sorry. All right, so apparently this is from something called Conquest's Laws, which is a guy named Robert Conquest. What a name, right? I wonder if he went by Bob. Bob Conquest. Anyway, he was apparently a very interesting fellow who has 3 laws of politics. 1, everyone is conservative about what he knows best. I mean, fair enough. I guess if you're really familiar and well-versed in something, you might not be so keen on that thing changing a whole lot. because it would make your expertise worthless, right? That's happened to a few people recently in the last few decades, right? Okay, number 2, any organization not explicitly and constitutionally right-wing will sooner or later become left-wing. Okay. What the... Sorry. The world is full of ads. So I suppose this is any organization will eventually begin to function at the organizational level. Like, duh. Unless it's, a dictatorship of some kind, right? Number 3, the behavior of any bureaucratic organization can best be understood by assuming that it is controlled by a secret cabal of its enemies. Which I thought that one was kind of, well, I mean, paranoid, right? That's very paranoid. I think it's sort of an underhanded way of saying that bureaucracies are run very badly. Ron Swanson style, being sabotaged from within. Cute. Anyway, that's what that is. Now for the second half of this big old pile of idea here,
which I personally view as a reflection of the inherently subversive nature of leftist politics.
Okay. Leftist politics will creep in unless guarded against. I actually found someone referring to them as decay. Because, working on things from a collectivist level to affect material change for many people is decay. Right. Sure it is. But so this is, I think, the key point in his whole argument, and he just kind of speeds right past it, right? Because the first time I watched this, I was with him because I was like, oh yeah, subversive stuff, yeah, we like that, right? Because the status quo is not what we want, right? So, as people who are trying to push things forward, we want to subvert the status quo. That's a good thing to us, right? But that's not what he means. I didn't actually come around to what in the heck he was talking about until like 2/3 of the way through the video the first time through. I thought he was, being, more typical what I would consider like liberal, lefty, liberal, those people Rush Limbaugh complained about. But he's actually a little more like that. Because he's saying that subversion is bad. That being subversive to the status quo is not a good thing. It creeps in. Decay is not the word that he used, but that's the direction that he's going in. So that would be a conservative perspective, right? If you don't want to subvert and change the status quo, that makes you the very basic definition of a conservative. And let's see what that is, huh? Just in case anyone is in any doubt of what I'm talking about here, Merriam-Webster defines conservative as tending or disposed to maintain existing views, conditions, or institutions. Traditional. So he's going to carry on for like another 10 minutes, positioning himself as a rational outsider. But he's actually just arguing the same conservative bullshit that we've heard for decades. And we're just going to let it roll for a minute and take pot shots at him, okay?
In these 4 examples, you can all see the purity spiral in action, the continuing expulsion of those who are not like enough, until what remains is a tiny core of hyper-radicalized, impotent individuals who have destroyed the very thing they intended to subvert. But
right, an apt description.
Well, here's what I think is the answer. Consider the current debate in American politics right now over the $15 an hour minimum wage. I think you might actually be able to craft a pretty good argument for it.
And here we go.
Personally
he does
that argument, but I can hear the logic in my head. The cost of living has gone up, but wages have stagnated. Inflation is slowly destroying people's savings and purchasing power. Worker productivity is up, but those same workers are still getting paid the same amount. These are practical arguments, not appealing to some ideological political theory about the innate justice of a $15 an hour minimum wage. They're talking about the current state of the world and how some things can be tweaked.
Right. But like, the moral value is like in people having a decent standard of living, you know, and not having to live in grinding poverty and work disgusting long hours to exhaustion. Like, that's the moral part.
To be, in their opinion, more in sync with how the economy is currently changing. Fair enough. You can disagree with their position while still seeing how it's pragmatic.
He doesn't disagree with this position, though. He never says, he never, explains any sort of counter position. He just goes on to, like, sort of take it to its illogical extreme.
Not ideological. And because it's pragmatic, there's also a limiter on their policy prescriptions. A necessary endpoint for them to reach where they can say that the job is complete. In this case, it would be something like, once the minimum wage has caught up to the rate of inflation, or once the minimum wage has resynced itself with worker productivity, then we can say it's a job well done. Now let's compare that with the discussions happening about the $15 an hour minimum wage in a socialist ideological echo chamber.
Ideological is the key word here, okay? Because arguing ideology and arguing, actual practical, on the ground, workable political solutions are like not the same thing.
In this case, there is no limiter on their policy prescriptions. There is no end point for them to reach where they will stop advocating. Because, in terms of game theory, they're playing an infinite game, not a finite game. Yes, this is another video that uses game theory. I found it pretty useful now that I've been reading about it. A finite game is played for the purposes of winning. An infinite game is played for the purposes of playing. The reason America lost in Vietnam, and now more recently in Afghanistan, is because the Americans were playing a finite game. Their aim was to build an American-friendly state and eventually leave, while their opponents were playing an infinite game. Survival. In both instances, the Americans gave their opponents a pounding, far more than they took, but they still inevitably lost.
Okay, but so the infinite game sounds more like self-improvement, maybe, like a game played against yourself, as opposed to a finite game, which would have to be like every policy measure ever, because eventually, you have a goal of like getting the legislation passed and the change enacted. Otherwise, there is no point to any of it.
Socialist is always playing an infinite game.
Why?
The work isn't done with one minimum wage increase. It's not done with one worker co-op founded.
No, the ideologue's work is never done, because what they're working toward in the framework of whatever, is a philosophy, is imaginary. It's not real.
It's not done with one market decommodified or one country overthrown. The practical reality of socialism, that collectivization must be forced on everybody all the time, makes achieving socialism an infinite game.
Whoa. Wow. Okay, that's another big one. Boom, boom, boom. Just all in a row. First of all, he's setting up, materialism against like idealism, ideology, dogmas, and ideas that people are expected to live by versus the material circumstances of their lives, right? Which is all well and good. That's not a bad starting point. It's nice that someone's mentioning material reality for once, right? But, gosh, let's go back just a little bit.
One market decommodified or one country overthrown. The practical reality of socialism, that collectivization must be forced on everybody all the time, makes...
Right, collectivization must be forced on everybody all the time. Well, people do tend to have to be trained to act for the greater good, don't they? A lot of the time. Especially in mundane, monotonous, repetitive situations, right? Like your daily life. It's a lot easier to just be selfish and live by your own whim, right? It feels a lot better in the moment a lot of the time, but it's not practical. Mr. Practicality over here. And it's not sustainable, certainly. And it makes you a dick. So, we're a social species. That's our strength, is, our levels of communication and cooperation. So you can't. People have to be trained to look after their own well-being long term, right? Like, you don't just understand that automatically as a child. No, kids would eat candy all day, every day, if they could, and you have to teach them to actually take care of themselves, so that long term they don't get sick and die. Okay, and same with interacting with other people. You have to learn that. But we have to do that because we have to share the planet, and we have to share the world. We have to work together, and that's what collectivism is. Oh, this guy.
Achieving socialism and infinite gain. There's no necessary endpoint, no limiter on their principles.
I mean, I guess, like, principles, ideologies don't tend to have limits because they're not material things, though.
Only an eternally long arrow pointing in a unitary direction, and any step in that direction is automatically a good one, no matter what it entails. So, in this socialist echo chamber where $15 an hour is being discussed, there will be little practical consideration given to why workers actually need $15 an hour, or why some employers may not be able to give it. Their arguments will be as simple as working class good. Therefore, when somebody shows up and says, hold on, why not $20 an hour? Why are we stopping at 15? Then 20 will eventually become the new dogma. Worker good, 20 bigger than 15.
Okay, so they're using immaterial concepts to discuss material things, which I guess would be a pretty serious disconnect and like a hypothetical anyway, because he hasn't given us any concrete examples.
There's no argument against it from their point of view because they're ideological, not practical. And if that's the case, why not 25? Why not 50?
Also, I just want to point out here real quick that leftist is like materialism, right? Okay. Collective material analysis. I quoted this in the blog post this weekend. Left, in politics, the portion of the political spectrum associated in general with egalitarianism and popular or state control of the major institutions of political and economic life. Leftists tend to be hostile to the interests of traditional elites, including the wealthy and members of the aristocracy, and to favor the interests of the working class. They tend to regard social welfare as the most important goal of government. Like, welfare programs. That word has taken on such a negative connotation. It's so frustrating. Like, they even put the word well in it, and it didn't help. But so I'm not sure what short Fat Otaku is talking about here, because leftist politics are literally concerned with the material output of the state and the material, conditions of society.
Why not 100? Why not 500? In this environment, the person who remains advocating for $15 an hour, the person who has not progressed more leftward over time, the person who has, to use the obvious phrase, been left behind by the left, will be cast out of the group as a fascist, alt-right, reactionary, Nazi, MAGA, Brexiteer, Trumpster bigot.
That was quite a mouthful. But anyway, I mean, he's not wrong about this in that it happens with like social things, right? The trans movement, for instance. 5 years ago, we were all trans medicalists, right?
Even though he was welcomed and praised at the beginning of the game, because he did not progress along with the game's infinite nature, in showing himself to have practical concerns about going higher.
Like, can you have infinite progress? Is it progress then? If you're not actually getting anywhere?
At $15 an hour, he betrayed his practical nature to the others. He revealed his rejection of the ideological. What's funny is, in terms of game theory, playing an infinite game is actually preferable to playing a finite one. For example, a business built on infinite game principles ends up being far more resilient, because to play an infinite game, you have to stop worrying about being the best or the winner, and start worrying about how to build self-sufficient structures.
Or maybe it just isn't about winning. Like that's a false dichotomy, right?
Chasing victory lessens your chances of actually achieving it. But the big downside
again, that's like self-improvement.
is the purity spiral. If you can't convince those who are a part of your team to play the game on the same level as you will be forced by the nature of the game to do one of two things: drop down to their level, which will end up being the lowest common denominator, or purge them from your team, And the more ideological you are, the more likely it is you will choose to purge. A team that routinely purges its own members can only continue to play the game using naked open force, as they no longer have the popular numbers they once did. So the Taliban is a violent...
Right, so I agree with all of this. This is a pretty good description of how cancel culture works, right? Oh boy.
A minority that nonetheless rules Afghanistan. Same with the Viet Cong. And in their own way, same with the progressives. You can call it critical
What?
theory, you can call it social justice, you can call it...
So we're the Viet Cong, you guys. Did you hear that?
progressivism, socialism, or leftism. But all of these groups and the people within them generally hate debate. Even the debate bros like Vosh or Hassan.
Okay, ideologues hate debate. Because ideologies are indefinable. They're not material. They're ineffable, right? You can't debate something that you can't see or measure or quantify in any way. There's no way to win.
Now that they've established themselves, they're a lot less likely to debate anybody who can actually knock them down a peg, in the name of not platforming a fascist or whatever weak-ass argument they put forward. But that's not actually the truth. Underneath that excuse is the practical reality that their ideology is totalizing. It has its own set of ethics, its own language, its own moral code, and theirs is not the worldview of the...
Okay, so like every ideology ever, you kind of just like described an ideology there.
liberal. Theirs advances itself virally, depending on us to play the liberal game of open debate, of tolerance, of the free marketplace of ideas. They play it because it's advantageous for them to do so, and when it stops being advantageous, they stop playing it.
Right, because right-wing people never do that. Right-wing people never give lip service to what people want to hear and then turn around and do what they want to do anyway, right? They never do that.
However, if we as liberals stop playing the liberal game, we ultimately become no better than them. Conversation and debate are...
Okay, so he's a liberal. Bear that in mind. He just said we as liberals.
part of our ethics, but it's not a part of theirs. And I'm pretty sure I can explain why. You ever seen nonsense like white culture is rugged individualism, or emphasis on the scientific method, or work ethic before? Yes, I will do a deep dive into critical theory on this channel at some point eventually. But in terms of this conversation, what's being attacked here are what a lot of the progs call the master's tools. Audre Lorde, a feminist activist, wrote in 1984 that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. What she's saying here, specifically because she's a black feminist, is that the tools of whiteness will never dismantle whiteness. Among progressives and socialists, this idea has become agnosticized over the decades to mean that the tools of
I think he means generalized. I mean, that might be what agnosticized means. I've never even heard anyone use that word before.
liberal capitalism will never dismantle liberal capitalism. Alison Bailey, another feminist activist, following in Audre Lorde's tradition, wrote in 2017, the tools of the critical thinking tradition, for example, validity, soundness, and conceptual clarity, cannot dismantle the master's house. They can temporarily beat the master at his own game. They can never bring about any enduring structural change.
Okay. Conceptual clarity can never bring about structural change. That's quite the argument there, right? Boy, I think somebody really disambiguated what Audre Lorde said. I'm not an expert on her or, goodness knows, black feminism. But I think she may have just, been trying to sort of say, think for yourself. The tools given to you by the establishment, by the powers that be, are probably not going to be very effective against them. So you have to find your own. You have to think for yourself. I don't know. Again, not an expert, but it seems pretty straightforward to me. And I don't know what this... Wow.
Bailey's point is that while critical theory is useful, it will never bring about the real change that socialists seek, because it relies on the liberals' tools for its analysis. Those tools are explicitly named by Bailey as including soundness, validity of argument, and conceptual clarity. Her objection extends to all corners of epistemic accuracy, science, reason, history.
Which is outrageous, obviously. Okay? We have to have some sort of agreed upon framework to work in, or there's no working together. We are atomized. Which I keep finding myself coming back to that idea of everybody just locked away in their own little individual mental box, which, makes any kind of collective action impossible, right?
The reason you've seen white culture is rugged individualism, emphasis on the scientific method, and work ethic is because they're actually talking about liberalism. And those are the tools that liberal society uses to build and maintain itself. In progressive theory, those tools can critique liberal society, but they cannot destroy it.
Right, because clarity of concept is not going to get you anywhere. I mean, which version of liberal are we using now? Are we talking, classical liberal? Like 18th century liberal? Those were the people who founded this country. Or are we talking the other one? Here, let's go. Let's throw down with some dictionary definitions right now. Not bound by authoritarianism, orthodoxy, or traditional form. Broad-minded. I think we were using that one a minute ago, and now I'm not sure anymore. Because we've, dabbled in economics. So I think maybe he switched over to talking about economic liberalism, which is just sort of laissez-faire capitalism.
And so socialists must reject those tools. If this sounds like, on some fundamental level, an appeal to irrationality, it is. Irrationality is how the rejection of ethics appears on the epistemic level.
Okay. Yeah. I suppose it is hard to have any sort of rules to do anything by if you refuse to be rational at all. But, that's not what progressivism is. That's not what leftism is. That's not what any of this is.
And so when these people say, fuck my principles, I just want to win, the natural end result of that has to be a rejection of reason.
Yeah. But that's how all ideologies work. Because at the end of the day, your ideology is more important than anything else, than any kind of underlying rationality or empathy or any of that, right? And that's why they're so scary, because, again, they are infinite, they are ineffable, they are formless, they are contagious, and they're thought terminating. All of them.
That's why there will always be a purity spiral, where the champagne socialists, the Prague darlings, get cast out and destroyed by their own audiences. Their philosophy requires it. The liberal point of view seems to line up with reality far more than the leftist one.
All right. So now liberals are centrists? I don't think he ever actually even uses that word here.
When there is this conflict with reality, the progressive and the socialist must fall back on the liberals' tools.
Right, yeah, well, struggle does tend to bring you down to earth, doesn't it? Tends to snap you back to reality. And yes, a lot of times when people involved in really deeply ideological communities find themselves grappling with, I don't know, emotional or mental difficulties, or, gosh, sometimes even physical ailments or handicaps, then they're cast out by the ideology. That's true.
When they do, those who are more ideologically extreme than them, but who have not yet encountered that conflict in their own life, have every reason to turn on them. The purity spiral is not some sad accidental...
Okay, that is how cancel culture works. But that has nothing to do with, improving society, progressing. Society has nothing to do with collective action at all. We're going to take it back just a little bit because this is a big bomb here.
Have every reason to turn on them. The purity spiral is not some sad accidental byproduct of leftism. It is a part of it at its very core.
Really? Really? Because the right wing hasn't had that problem for decades. Rhinos. Do you remember them? Republicans in name only. Those people were purging, members of their club for not being pure enough in the classical Christian sense for decades.
It can't not be there. If leftism is to be a revolt against liberalism, then on some level,
Leftism is not a revolt against liberalism, which leftism is not a revolt against centrism, or whatever it is that you're actually talking about. Leftism is about egalitarianism and about improving material conditions for as many people as possible, in a practical way.
We must also reject those components of liberalism that are most congruent with reality. This ever-advancing purity spiral is the leftist solution to that unsolvable problem. We are lucky that, right now, we're only seeing it manifest as Twitter cancellations.
No, we're not. What are you talking about? People are losing their jobs. He's going to call that the odd firing, but people are being hounded and getting torrents of death threats. Some people have had to move home, move city, and I know I'm not really giving any concrete examples of this either, but I'm not doxing people who've already struggled with this shit. No way.
Or the odd firing from jobs.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad, but as bad as it is, we've also seen it manifest in mass death. And personally, that's not a road that I'm willing to go down.
I have no idea how exactly you expect to prevent this. Because you don't seem to not understand the distinction between ideas and reality. Like so many people, this misunderstanding is taking a bit of a different form here, but it's the same thing, right? And if you can't focus on your material conditions and are so completely just caught in your head, how are you going to, they're going to be at your door before you even notice what's going on.
If a solution truly exists to this problem, then I think it's this. Be a liberal.
Oh, yes. Here's the solution. Be like me. Genius. Obviously. By which I think he either means be a political centrist or a laissez-faire capitalist. I'm not sure how we could tell here. But the next bit's great too.
Reject any and all totalizing views. Then I think it's this. Be a liberal. Reject any and all totalizing views.
Including that one? Like no sense of irony. Moderation in all things. Including that. And totalizing views is this sort of interesting code phrase he's come up with for dogma and ideologies. Reject all dogma. Like, duh. But I guess if you said that, it doesn't sound very revolutionary, does it?
The left is full of them, but the right has their fair share too. And as a result, they have their own purity spiral as well.
Wait. I thought you said that it was at the core of leftism. How exactly do, right-wing people manage to get themselves into a purity spiral if it's, a core feature of leftism? Huh? It's almost as if he's talking about ideologues. Which that shit is everywhere right now. Left, right, center, whoever, whatever. Everywhere. Everyone is so worried about these the culture wars, right? The material aspects have just kind of fallen by the wayside, and they're really not any. They're less and less fun as time goes on because they keep getting worse and worse, right? So who wants to talk about that shit? But if purity spirals are part of leftism at its very core, let's hear that one more time. That was great.
The road that I'm willing to go down again. If a solution truly exists to this problem, then I think it's this. Be a liberal. Reject any and all totalizing views. The left is full of them, but the right has their fair share too.
Right. So he just throws that in there. Again, real quick, boom, boom, boom. In the last 90 seconds of the video, after going on for 20 minutes telling us that purity spirals and authoritarianism, that's what he's talking about, right? authoritarianism. Boom. Expecting or requiring people to obey rules or laws, not allowing personal freedom, right? Forcing collectivism on everybody. Authoritarianism, that's what he's, warning us that is core to leftism and causes the purity spiral. Which, authoritarianism, the purity spiral is authoritarianism. On the march. Fun, right? But, this guy's not going to help anyone. And that's why we had to do this tonight. The level of misunderstanding here is so dangerous on a large scale.
And as a result, they have their own purity spiral as well. Give the concept of purity its due. It is a moral foundation, after all.
Wait. No. Okay. What is a moral foundation? What does that mean? I mean, I don't know. I was raised by an atheist and a Wiccan, so I'm maybe not an expert on that either, but I'm really I don't know. Purity would seem to me to be like an unattainable ideal. An infinite game, if you will.
Which personally makes it very funny that leftists don't actually reject the concept of purity. They just replace the religious rights purity with their own form.
It's a different kind of ideology. And it's not leftism. It's wokeism? It's whatever you want to call it. But an ideology is, they're pretty, evident by their markers, which you have pretty, described pretty accurately here. But to totalizing views? Do you not know the word dogma?
But even as you give purity its due, understand that it is not everything. Again, reject the totalizing worldview. Now, don't get me wrong, you'll still be canceled for it. Canceling is like coronavirus. Everyone's getting it eventually. But after you've been canceled, once you're on the outside, and you've cultivated an audience of like-minded people who are also on the outside, who have also been canceled, who also reject the totalizing worldview, I think you'll generally find yourself in a better place, both in terms of your community, in terms of your friends, and in terms of your own mental health.
Isn't that adorable? It's okay if the purity spiral comes for you, because then you'll just be an outlaw. Which, sounds cool and everything, but, originally in England and back in the day, being an outlaw meant, literally being shunned by the community and possibly starving to death in the woods. Okay? Ideologies do not have edges. They don't have boundaries. Like he says, they have no way of knowing when to stop. In, I want to say the 13th century in Europe, the Catholic Church made it illegal to even talk about witches. And by the 17th century, they were burning them. So, their ideologies are formless. They shift over time. And basing your approach to material practical concerns on them can be really disastrous. And the more people understand these actual terms, the better. The fewer people there are like this weirdo out there spouting this nonsense. Ariel Scarcella is doing it too. She was in my blog post talking about who leftists are so leftist, they are pushing conversion therapy. The egalitarians are so egalitarian, they're trying to make everyone follow the rule. What? That doesn't make any sense. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Please, people, use a dictionary. Look shit up. My God. And that's the state we're in, folks. Guys and guys. It is a mess, really. And it's not going to get any better until we can define our terms and figure out what we're talking about to begin with. And it's all been so obfuscated. And gosh, for the longest time, it wasn't even cool to care. At the very least, people are quibbling over the meanings of words now. Because, 20 years ago, I feel like most people didn't care. Because they've always been a word nerd. And if I had a nickel for every time somebody rolled their eyes at me, I'd be a pretty wealthy woman. So that's a good thing, I guess. People do seem to be a lot more passionate about the meanings of things. That might be a step in the right direction. But a lot of people seem to have this weird idea about what leftism is. They seem to think that it's authoritarianism. I guess that would be because, in the mid-20th century, there were several countries who called themselves socialist, right? Because bad guys never give themselves positive labels to make, it easier to swallow the poison, right? And of course, the United States government was perfectly happy to run with that. Trying to discredit collectivism. Obviously, if the baddies are collectivists, then you can just write off that whole thing. Of course, they weren't. If you hand that collective power to one person, you have a despot. Congratulations. So, it's been a just fun, long, whirly ride on the propaganda machine for us all. And now, I think we're finally ready to get off. Thank you so much for coming with me on this little journey with the short, fat otaku. He's a real charmer, isn't he? Now, go forth and spread the good word. The dogma of definitions. Who knows? Maybe eventually we will manage to get some kind of group thing going here, and we can actually manage to attain some kind of collective change for as many people as possible, right? Because that's what leftist progressive politics are actually about. Cool. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for more stuff like this. Whew, I'm going to go find some more stuff to pick apart, and I'll see you guys real soon. Bye.